we've also done with some churches is begun to do a unique QR code for churches so they can get their unique results. So when you do it with a congregation, you can find out, well, what is the general how does your church look for generally? So the one on the right side has got a lot of live sharers, and it's got a chunk of open connectors, and it's got only a couple of Bible revealers. But this can be helpful to them work out, well, how do we best utilize the gifts and the skills and the ways of doing things in our church to make a biggest difference? So one of the guys who did this is Glenn Scrivener, the evangelist. He's a Bible revealer. And as we were talking about this recently, he was saying, when people know that that's who I am, they could invite me to come meet their mates, and I'll be up for kind of doing more down the line challenge them, because actually I'm very comfortable doing that. So the Bible revealers are really good at saying, do you want to make some kind of response to the gospel? As with the church, they've done lots of different community groups in their community, try and be more missional. And two of their groups had grown, the other ones hadn't grown. And those two groups that had grown both had Bible revealers in there who were up for kind of shaking the boat a little bit and kind of challenging people. So I think how we then look at who we've got in congregation, how we best deploy them and learn from different people can be really helpful thinking about things going forwards. But what I often do then with the churches, we look at this now, next slide down, is explore some of the kind of key stories in the New Testament. So it could be John 9, the blind guy who's healed. It could be Luke 5, Levi doing hospitality, or Acts 17, Paul in Athens. That there were different stories for how different people approach sharing Jesus in different parts of the Gospels, different parts of Acts. And to almost go through some of these stories and then to challenge people as you hear that story, what can you then celebrate about the way you do things? And what might be the challenge that might God give you as you think about how you could potentially become more effective in sharing your faith as well? So again, using biblical narratives, help people to reflect upon who they are and perhaps what they can do differently going forwards. Next slide down. So on the back of all that, a bit of a Q&A. So are there some questions come in, Joe, that you want to...
There are. I'm going to ease you in gently.
Ben
has asked, how did the research form? Who was asked? How many? Blah, 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 blah.
So about 300 questionnaires. To get a good sample, we needed about 80, but we had about 300 respond. So that was really helpful. Then with the in-depth qualitative research, then there were 10 done. We needed to get about 6 done to find the research. Actually, we did 10. And they were like hour-long interviews to really dig into it. And what we discovered, so using the questionnaires initially, we found those who got very different answers, and they're the people who we then selected to have the in-depth interview with. That makes sense?
It does. Thank you very much. Tim would like to know, big shout out to the EEA and Hope and others, how do the stats match with the Talking Jesus research? I know you've been chatting to Rachel and the team. Andy, what's the correlation? What's the insights? What's interesting?
So the Talking Jesus research is really, really helpful. It was done for a second time about 2 years ago, looking at how we are sharing our faith and how non-Christians are receiving us sharing their faith. The website is talkingjesus.com, is it? .org.
.org.
There you go. Some great stats there. I think it really looks at things from a different perspective, really, rather than this angle. So I think this research complements that research. And there's more research being done by the Evangelical Alliance right now as well, looking at stories of people coming to faith and what happens there as well. So I think all this research gives us a greater understanding of what is happening culturally, of how we can best equip and support Christians. I think even now, just going back to this picture of the different church kind of profiles, where you know who's in your congregation, you can then work out, well, how best do we equip our congregation to share their faith? And just interesting, I think about 1/6 of Christians would be who've done so far from this research would become up as open connectors. And if we can just encourage every open connector to be slightly more intentional, that could be a game changer for this nation. Sorry, next question.
Beautiful. What you talked a little bit at the beginning about the tensions and recognizing that they do cause tensions in the church. Steve is talking about the idea about words. To share the gospel means a proclamation. How do you proclaim if it's only in action? Recognizing that those tensions exist within people's perspectives and within people's behaviors, and yet your invitation to us was to hold those tensions. Where do you see that sometimes causing conflict, and have you seen any best practice?
Yeah, I think particularly when churches are organising joint activity, they can think this is how we do evangelism as our church. And they have a set way of doing things. So it can be, we love doing church events. And if you've got team players as part of your congregation, that is fantastic. It's going to serve them really, really well. But if you haven't got team players as part of the congregation, no matter how many events you do, people won't naturally invite their friends along. So I think really it's about having those robust conversations and thinking through what is our strategy as a church for connecting with our community, for sharing the good news of Jesus, and then how do we best understand who we've got in a congregation, how best can we support them in this going forwards.
Right. A couple of people have asked about the dominant profile. Are you seeing any trends when you are inviting churches, whether from a certain denomination or a certain theological basis? Are you seeing any trends emerge in dominance in profiling?
We're still quite early doors here, really. So we've got no dominant thing yet. What we'd love to do is really work out with different denominations of church, are there different ways of approaching things? So it'll be interesting to work out if that something that emerges over the coming weeks. So actually, is there differences with generations and with different kind of cultural groups as to how they approach things? But it's still too early to say that.
Not an invitation, therefore, to the people on this call to make sure that you get your churches signed up so that we have the data points in order to be able to answer the next Q&A, because we'll know what the dominant profiles are because you'll all have provided the data. That would be brilliant, wouldn't it?
That'd be great.
Excellent. Tim, I'm going to leave it with you for the last word. Andy, what do you reckon Jesus was?
I think he was the best of all six of them. I think he was best of all six.
That's the live sharer, right?
Yeah. Sorry?
That's the live sharer, right?
I think the best of all six. I think we see Jesus in all aspects of them. And I think we see that, obviously he was perfect in it all as well. So in the way he did things. So